I think the key to this movie is that it's setting up a battle between kind of false or untrue siren songs of liberation, community, fellowship, and freedom, and true or real or authentic ideas of liberty and community and fellowship and freedom. I'm Professor Stephen Dyson.
And I'm Professor Jeff Dudas.
And we are two political scientists who have just seen the movie Sinners, which is fresh out on streaming this week. We're here to break down the political themes, ideas, and allegories that are apparent in what I think is a very multi-layered text. I think it's a mistake to say this is a vampire movie. There are vampires in it, but that ain't the point.
It's a really rich text. And my only trepidation here is that we're almost certainly going to miss some really rich and fruitful themes as we kind of talk through the text.
Yeah, we had sort of three categories of political ideas that we wanted to talk about or to hang most of our points on. I think we wanted to start with a discussion of maybe the genre of movie it is, or the kind of meta framework of the text, the kind of supernatural horror that is using its supernatural elements to talk about the persistence of historical horrors.
Yeah.
I think we also wanted to talk about the elements to which the movie is outlining theories or ideas of community, of fellowship, of love, of liberation, of even utopia, and the extent to which it's talking about some ideas that are real and have real promise and are sort of genuine and authentic, and other ideas that are maybe false siren songs of fellowship, community, and liberation and utopia. And then I think we wanted to talk about maybe the dichotomy between the twins. It's a movie that features Michael B. Jordan in a dual starring role as Smoke and Stack, twins who kind of maybe embody different philosophies of life and existing in the world.
Yeah, but even then, I think what we're going to find is that this is also a movie about the false binaries of distinctions. And so it's a movie that's all about posing apparently or allegedly unlike things and tracing the interconnections between them. And so I think the relationship between Smoke and Stack, who are, after all, Smokestack, it will fit into this.
Yeah, like that's a lot smarter than the point I made, that Smoke and Stack are a particular manifestation of a more general kind of thematic thing that's going on in the movie.
Yeah.
All right, great. So first, what we usually do is talk about a temperature check. I think it's fair to say that we both loved this movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was really impressed with it. I went in effectively only with the kind of a vague understanding of what the movie was about. And I intentionally didn't read anything about it going in. I'm a little bit familiar with some of Ryan Coogler's previous, movies with Michael B. Jordan and without, but I kind of purposefully kept myself away from the text. I knew that it was there were vampires in it, but I didn't really know much else about it.
Yeah, like you, I like Ryan Coogler. I'd seen all the Creed movies, before this. I watched, because I knew we were going to watch this, and I was waiting for it to come out on the streaming service. I watched for the first time Fruitvale Station. Have you seen that? His first movie?
I have not.
With Michael B. Jordan. So it's just a heartbreaking kind of true story. Again, like Sinners, it's sort of a particularly significant day in the life of a set of people. Really great movie. What I thought Sinners was going to be, because I'd just seen the poster and everything, is From Dusk Till Dawn. Yeah.
So
I
thought
it's
there were
not
going to be elements of that as well. And it really isn't.
There's a lot more going on in that movie. And then when I was watching Sinners, what I kept thinking about was Django Unchained, which is I do think a movie that sort of exists in the background. But again, I would say Sinners is a richer, more complex, more multi-layered text than Django was, whatever the outwards. There's similarities between Smoke and Stack as extremely capable, well-dressed, smooth sort of action heroes and Django. Yeah. And the contrast between them and some of the racist white characters in both movies. And I think that is going on in Sinners, but there's also many other layers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a super rich text. You had noted the genre of Southern Gothic, but it's also in a certain way a historical movie as well. And so I do think it's worth some time fixating a little bit on the historical circumstances of the movie, because they frame what's happening with all of our themes and all of the action in what I think are pretty essential ways. So it's a movie that takes place over a day, as you looked up before we started shooting, in October 1932, and it takes place in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And there's a lot of important things that we can divine just from that setting. So first of all, we are in the throes of the Great Depression. We are also in the throes of Jim Crow, Deep South society, in which you've got this highly stratified, deeply unequal political, economic, and cultural order. Jim Crow is the reconsecration of white supremacy in the post-Reconstruction era in the United States. And so what we see on screen, I mean, first of all, it's beautifully shot. So it's what we get here is there is a kind of a southernness about this storytelling, which Southern American stories are frequently told in ways that contrast the physical beauty of the place with the horrifying material reality of the place. And we get that here. It's a gorgeously shot movie. Delta Mississippi's never looked so good on screen as it does here. But of course, that sets up this very kind of clashing reality with the lived experience of what it is to be existing in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And so our characters are existing in this kind of Jim Crow Great Depression world. They are sharecroppers primarily. And at the same time that this is happening, we're getting in the characters of Smoke and Stack the very beginnings of what historians call the Great Migration in African American history, which is this period in the 1930s and 1940s, early 1940s in particular, in which you get this kind of massive demographic shift of Southern African Americans from Deep South into northern, primarily industrial cities, places like Chicago, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Minneapolis, Boston.
Places that are on railroad lines, right?
And places on railroads. And they go there seeking economic opportunity, and they go there seeking this kind of escape from the brutal conditions of racial oppression in the Delta South. And so this is the story of Smoke and Stack, right? They have 7 years previous, they're identical twins. They have left Clarksdale and they've gone to Chicago. And we learn eventually that they have been involved with Al Capone. It seems like they probably start off as enforcers in the underground bootlegging industry. Remember, this is the time of Prohibition, the 1920s. And so they then seem to move to some more entrepreneurial set of activities. And it seems like they are returning to Clarksdale in part as an escape from whatever trouble they've gotten themselves into in Chicago.
Well, I think Annie nails it, right? She says you played the Irish and the Italians off against each other, and then both sides figured out what you were doing, and you had to
get out,
kind of flee.
Yeah. And so that's how it starts, right? They come back on this day in the fall of 1932, and this is the day of their re-arrival, I suppose, or their arrival back home in Clarksdale. And at the same moment, we are introduced to their cousin, Sammy, or who goes by Preacher Boy, who is the son of the local preacher and who is, it turns out, a kind of prodigal musician, but somebody who hasn't really had the opportunity to show his musicality or his prodigality because he is primarily a blues musician. And so he is growing up in this kind of cultural environment that associates blues music with the devil's music, and his father is a preacher, and so there is this kind of father-son dynamic at work.
Right, and as I understand it, and I suppose we should say I sort of basically approach this movie through the standpoint of the kind of literature and cinema of the fantastic, and that's how I see its primary ideological work going on. You're much more comfortable with American history.
Yeah.
So I think that might explain some of the different ways we're coming at this. So I'm going to, I think, fairly constantly be checking my historical understandings with you. My understanding is not just that blues music is seen as the music of the devil, but it's also associated with a set of earthly pursuits that are deemed sinful, and the movie's title, like drinking, dancing, fornication, to use that term.
All and stuff, by the way, that happens in the juke joint that Smoke and Stack open up.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the problem that that's amongst the problems that Sammy's father has with Sammy's kind of facility with music.
Exactly. That's amongst the problems. But it also turns out, and this is, I think, a super important and recurring motif that frames the movie about the power of music.
Yeah.
That music is, we are told in the opening sequence, we are told again, sort of towards maybe the end of the second act, and then it is revisited again in the conclusion, that music can be the gateway in the hands of a prodigal musician like Sammy or others. Music is the gateway to a different world or to a set of different worlds.
It pierces the veil between life and death.
Between life and death. It unites the past, the present, and the future. It effaces lines between the sacred and the profane. It is, for a moment, it's the way in which the portal to other worlds is opened and channeled and communioned. And what that means, right, there's a certain way in which the Sammy's father, the preacher, seems to know this. It's what makes it so seductive. It's what makes the prodigality of Sammy's musicianship so seductive, is that it is this kind of method or portal according to which apparently unlike things, God and the devil, sacred and the profane, the earthly and the heavenly, the saints and the sinners are brought together. And this makes Sammy a kind of conjurer of magic through his musicianship in ways that are seen as, at least by some people, as highly threatening.
Right, but there are other. So this is where I think we get into the literature or the cinema of the fantastic, because the Southern Gothic uses supernatural presences such as like zombies, or in this case vampires, or in other texts kind of takes that literalizes the kind of supernatural aspirations or meanderings of things like the Ku Klux Klan, makes that literal to kind of impose the horror or make vivid or make real the horror. The horror of the supernatural is standing in as an allegory for the horror of the historical.
Yeah.
Right. That's what's going on in these texts. And it's usually, you're right, threatening and bad and bringing undead things back, the shambling corpse of history, the racism that won't go away, the oppression that won't go away. You know, in the case of like zombies, that's what they're often seen as, like the bad ideas from the past that living people just cannot kind of escape from. And so that has like a negative valence. The other thing that's going on in fantastical terms, is these especially talented griots in West African culture. But it's not only a sort of property of one race or culture, right? Like the Irish have an equivalent, or Native Americans have an equivalent. So it's kind of a cross-cultural thing. And it's not only negative, right? It's the way we were describing it makes it sound like it's negative. It pierces the veil, so it lets in kind of evil spirits. No, it's made explicit in the movie that what it can really do is it heals a community and it brings together the different communities.
Right. It's the vessel of communion.
Yes.
Right. In a way that is so powerful that it is uncontrollable. And we see that in a whole variety of different ways in Sinners. It's a method of communion that is essential to creating the sort of the momentary paradisal or perhaps utopian elements that we see in the juke joint scenes. But it is also the very vessel according to which the vampires are called.
Yeah.
Right? It's Remick and the other vampires who also believe, Remick in particular, understands the elemental power of music. And he is called, essentially, by Preacher Boy to come to the juke joint and to seek, in his words, the love and fellowship that can be promised or is possible through the communal act of prodigal music making.
Right. So I think we should, I think maybe we've kind of established the meta structure and some of the historical background and the kind of clash of the different supernatural elements that are going on here. I wonder if we should start talking about some of the visions or ideas of community, love, fellowship, if you like, at their maximum utopia that the movie offers. I mean, I think the key to this movie is that it's setting up, and the key to its originality is it is setting up a battle between kind of false or untrue siren songs of liberation, community, fellowship, and freedom, and true or real or authentic ideas of liberty and community and fellowship and freedom. And I don't know if you agree with this, but I have on the list of false things that are forwarded by the movie, religion, you know, organized or modern religion or whatever you want to call it, the religion of Sammy's father, for example, the religion that Remick the vampire says was forced upon him by the men who stole his lands, the religion, if you like, of colonizers, or that's enforced upon people by, I mean, I don't know if I'm historically accurate here, but enforced upon people that displaces an older folk tradition, maybe. Capitalism and then the pursuit of money seems to me to be offered as, you know, a way, a path towards freedom that's ultimately rejected in the kind of argot of the movie. Material political forms, things like, law, property, war is mentioned a lot. The idea that, for example, the North of America is more is meaningfully politically freer and more progressive, particularly for African Americans, than the South in this time. Chicago is described not as a meaningfully better place than Mississippi. It's just Mississippi with tall buildings, is what, I forget which one it is, Smoke or Stack says. Smoke says that, which would accord, we'll get to this, which would accord with his sort of general ideology. And then the community that's offered by vampires, I think, is ultimately dismissed as a false siren song. On the real side, you have sort of the aesthetic realm of music, dancing, and art, which is seen to bring, in maybe the movie's climactic scene, that kind of cross-generational dance number that they have in the joint, where spirits of the past, present, and future all mingle together in this moment of kind of love and fellowship. Family seems to be offered as a genuine form of community, of fellowship. And then maybe like older folk religions, such as the traditions that give rise in West African culture to the griots. What do you think? That's a grand thesis. Is that way off base? Are there elements of truth in that?
I don't read it as starkly as this. I don't think that I think the whole point of this movie is to explode the distinctions between the false and the authentic, or the illusory and the authentic. And I think, so take, for example, the role of religion. So it's true that in some ways, right, and particularly in sort of the history of American racism, it's true that it has not infrequently been held that one suffers through the indignities and the oppressions of ordinary lived experience in order to realize the rewards of the afterlife. So paradise will be found in the afterlife, not on earth. And so that can certainly be read in this kind of fatalistic vision, right? As you say, a false illusory vision of how to organize a good and capable community. The problem, though, is that in point of fact, we also know that, for example, the African American church was the hub of social activism, the organizing institution of, for example, of the Southern Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 1960s. And so for a great many people, they understood the promises of Christianity, perhaps the colonizers' religion, as containing within it the seeds of renewal and the seeds of emancipation. What Christianity promised was the capacity to refigure its utopian claims of deliverance and to use them as inspiration and motivation for ordinary interaction and ordinary progress and movement. And I think the same can be said of, let's contrast the illusory community of the vampires with the kind of what reads to you as the authentic community of the juke joint. Well, keep in mind that the moments of joy and deliverance that occur in the juke joint are mimicked in the vampire community as well, right? Remember the scene in which Remick is doing the exact same thing that I think the scene you're referring to is it Pauline? Pearline,
yeah.
Right, in which she is sort of leading the community in this moment. At the same moment that's happening, I believe it's a contrasting scene. We see Remick kind of leading this.
Sure, in the kind of Irish folk.
Which is also intergenerational, interrace. Here again, we get this form of storytelling, it seems to me, that imagines apparent distinctions between things, imagines things as unlike, but in point of fact seems to be suggesting that they are the same. So I think that the story is, and the messages here are ambivalent. And let's think about our two vampires from that day who live on. Well, who lives on? It's Stack and it's Mary. In the real, authentic world, they are not capable of being together. It's not possible, right? Mary is mixed race, but she's passing as white. And what has been established and, what the movie does, again, in one of its really really strong, subtle elements is it puts on screen, or it reminds viewers on screen of what race relations were like around inter-race relationships.
Yeah, like if you're seen with us, there's going to be, exactly. Stack says that, like there's going to be huge trouble if the wrong person sees you here.
So where is that love and fellowship possible? It's only possible in the vampiric world, right? And this is the vision. I mean, Remick, I'm not sure, is wrong when he says to, at least he's not wrong for his time, when he says to Smoke and the others who they're basically trying to seduce, right, into becoming vampires themselves, he's not wrong when he says, you will never realize the vision of community and love and fellowship and freedom that you have here. This thing, this juke joint moment, this night, this is the illusory thing. The only way to make that real, right, is in the world of the undead. And I mean, I think the movie's ambivalent in its conclusion, because Stack and Mary have made that real in the world of the undead. So it seems to me that this is kind of what's happening throughout the movie, and which is why I think that the distinctions are not as stark, right, as they might appear. I think there is the presentation of things that are frequently read as unlike, but then this kind of systematic blurring of what you might imagine to be hard lines between the two.
So I think there's something slightly different going on. This might just end up being semantics, but I think I don't quite agree. I think the movie does have a point of view on what the ultimate and truest form of community that it presents is, and I think it's that time in the juke joints. And you could say, well, that's in which Stack and Mary can be together. They're able to be together inside of that community, and it's a moment of very pure kind of love and fellowship and aesthetic esprit. But crucially, it's real, right? It's not something that relies on everyone dying. You don't have to die to get there. So I think what's going on is that there is in fact a dichotomy of real and false utopias, if you like. But they're not of equal, kind of convincing nature. The nature of a vampire is that it offers seductive and maybe partially or largely true benefits, right? You get to live forever. You don't feel any pain. There is all this great stuff. That's why it's such an insidious vision of a good life. In the same way, and I think this is what the technique of the text is in blending the supernatural and the real together. In the same way that getting rich through capitalism offers you very seductive real benefits, right? These are genuine goods, but are they the best thing that's available? Are they the truest thing that is available? Or are they in the end the vampire's promise, which is the whispering siren song, right? Vampires are notoriously charismatic, attractive, persuasive, and they use that to inveigle themselves into, they're not blunt force kind of creatures. They need your consent, quite literally, to come through the door. And that's said again and again.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they're offering you a world of, that's not the best possible world. And I agree, Stack and Mary are together in the end, and maybe for them that they get the best possible deal out of that for the reasons that we've alluded to. But still, Stack says, that was the best day of my life back 60 years ago. So not only the last time I saw my brother, it's the last time I saw the sun. Yeah, I could be out in daylight. So the vampires have taken something very real from it. That the juke joint, if it was possible to live in a world, not literally inside that barn, but a world of love, of intercommunal love, like the juke joints, would not have those restrictions, right? He could have stayed with his brother. Yeah. He could have stepped out into the sunlight. And that, I think, is the real utopianism.
But aren't all the things that you attribute to vampirism also true of the Prodigal Musician? Isn't the Prodigal Musician doing exactly the same things? Offering the seductive temporary vision that has real benefits, temporary benefits, also has a series of constraints, right? The Prodigal Musician requires the consent of the audience, requires the consent of the listener. If you're not into it, you will not benefit from this. Isn't the community that's imagined just as ephemeral and just as limited?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's that distinction.
Isn't it just, in other words, as unreal as that which the vampiric community offers?
I don't think so, because I think this rests upon the ideological operations of fantastical texts and the distinction between fantasy and things that involve human agency, which are like science fiction, commonly draw, right? Music and art and aesthetics are within the realm of human agency to summon. They might summon supernatural-like effects, but they're within the realm of human agency. They don't rely on the supernatural to confer their benefits. So in a sense, Sinners is doing something that's more commonly associated with the utopian science fiction text, which is it's centering or forefronting human agency in the creation of a better world. And it's contrasting it with what's usually the center of the fantasy text, the supernatural, which is commonly seen as something that is closing off human possibilities because it's relying on extra human, literally supernatural things to bring its benefits.
But don't the benefits of music also require a supernatural imagination on the part of the audience?
No, it requires human creativity and human aesthetics and human love and fellowship.
But human creativity, of course, is itself ineffable. It is indefinable and highly dependent upon the nurturing audience.
We are amazing beings.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we need to resort to vampires and all the rest of it to allow us to reach those higher levels of feeling and love.
Well, this might be an irresolvable debate.
In which case we
loggers' heads here.
In which case we should take a quick break. And we are back with our discussion of the movie Sinners, and we wanted to talk about, well, a number of things really grouped under a broad category of sort of family. And we'd alluded in the introduction that I saw a dichotomy between Smoke and Stack, the two brothers, and you'd made a point that actually there are dichotomies in the movie, many of which revolve around families, but some of them are also blurred. So I think we want to talk about Smoke and Stack. We also want to talk about some of the parents and children kind of relationships that are going on in the movie. Smoke versus Stack. I should say I watched this movie twice, and one reason that I did that was to be sure that I'd understood which scenes were Smoke and which were Stack. And watching it, especially on the second run through, I noticed anyway a great sort of ideological or characterological difference between the two brothers. Smoke is a person of sort of the material world, or his concerns are materialistic. I mean, he gives a sort of Niccolo Machiavelli type speech at one point that this and that won't help you. The only thing I've seen in the world that makes any difference is power, and he's extremely worldly. He's the one who talks not only about being in Chicago, but about being in the First World War as well. Yeah. I've been all over this world. I've seen men die in ways I don't think possible. I've never seen ghosts, magic, or spirits, just power. And only money can get you power. And it's those two things of the material world of America, maybe America writ large, but America of that time.
It's also worth saying, this is a callback to one of your earlier points, that of course he's wrong about all of those things. Actually.
Yeah.
He's about to experience magic.
Sure, yeah, they're false offers of the good life.
The money that he's gained has not actually given him power, because we know what's going to happen the next morning.
Yes.
Right? That all the money that he spent and gave to the Grand Wizard of the local clan, they're going to show up to murder them the next day.
Right. And Smoke is right that the clan needs to be killed, and he does away with them in a very Django Unchained kind of scene, and that's right and proper. But that's not the point of the movie, I don't think. I mean, the movie is saying, yes, of course, Smoke is right that the clan have to be done away with, and they are properly done away with. But there are also other challenges or other sides of life, other sides of a full life, that have to be explored to reach a true fellowship and community. It is notable as Smoke does away with the clan, what's he called, Hogwood or something, the kind of gross clan leader. The last thing he says is, I won't do my impression, my accent. I have all the money in the world I can offer it to you. And Smoke's like shoots him extra hard. He does away with the monetary rewards at the last.
Yeah. There's others, I don't want to get us off track here, but there are a couple of other interesting bits about that scene. So the two types of gun that Smoke uses are throwbacks both to his time in World War I, right? He's using a machine gun, and to his time in Chicago, he's using this kind of Tommy gun, right? This kind of gangster Tommy gun to kind of mow down the clan. And the other thing, of course, is that it's not just Smoke who knows that the clan needs to die. Remick also says, probably after this, we're all going to go out and kill all the Klan guys.
Well, he said, no, it's even more on the nose than that. He says, that old bigot, we're going to go and rectify him. Right. So it's not only,
Right.
it's like Remick himself,
we're going to turn them into, we're going to integrate them into our fellowship of love.
Right.
family.
And it's, although on its face, you might be tempted to see this as a story of kind of white vampires attacking black civilians.
Yeah.
Remick himself, what's gone on, and again, this is American history, but as I understand it, and certainly in, extra American history, the Irish were in America not regarded as white or not regarded as part of the like in group or whatever until a long time after sort of arrival.
Yeah.
And so Remick himself has been, he is white, but he's rather crucially Irish rather than generically white.
He's ethnically other still in 1932. And the other thing that's happening is, I think, very clever. Again, I mean, this is a movie that's really, firing on all cylinders. And what Remick wants, he wants Preacher Boy's musical prodigality. He wants Preacher Boy's ability to commune and to traverse the past, the present, and the future from an experience born of racial oppression. He wants to combine that, Remick does, with his own experience of bridging the past, the present, and the future that is born of his experience of class oppression and ethnic oppression, right? Because as he tells us, right, they stole my land, right? So the vision of community, we'll return to this maybe a little bit later, the vision of family that Remick is offering and promising is explicitly multicultural, explicitly multiracial in character.
Yeah.
The vampiric promise here is an emancipatory promise.
Right.
Right? In ways that are not simply about eternal life. Right? It's a particular vision of community that he's offering.
Yeah, I agree. Although not to cross the streams here, but we talked a lot about Andor recently.
Yeah.
Remick to me strikes me as one of those revolutionaries who can't quite live in the final utopia because he's so traumatized by the experiences so he's Luthen Rail.
Yeah.
Right? He's not quite going to get there, even though maybe his tactics were necessary to sort of denaturalize the existing. Or
maybe he's a Saw Gerrera.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Denaturalize the existing. That what a mashup genre movie that would be. Okay, so that's Smoke, and then rather beautifully, Smoke reaches his heaven with his great love, Annie, from whom he was separated because their baby died, and he couldn't. Neither of them could live with the trauma.
What certainly appears to be like a postpartum death of the child has fractured their relationship entirely.
Exactly. And then when Smoke has a vision of Annie at the last, and she's holding their baby in the afterlife, and Smoke is smoking a cigarette, and she says, "Put that cigarette out. I don't want the smoke to get on the baby," which is kind of she doesn't want his material.
His identity as Smoke. Smoke is not his real name.
So he reaches heaven as Elijah, right? She rather crucially beckons him across as Elijah, and that's his utopia and his sort of ending. Stack, the identical twin. Although it is a good line when is it Dagwood, the clan guy, says, "Are you two brothers?" Like, stupidest question. And Stack's like, "No, we're cousins." It's a very, very good line. Obviously identical twins. Stack is the artistic one. He's more in touch with and concerned with art and community. Smoke and Stack have an argument in the juke joint because they're being played with plantation, the sort of Mickey Mouse money that the plantation owners are deliberately not paying. I mean, I'm just inferring this, but I presume it's real American history.
It's money that can only be spent at the company store, right?
Yeah,
which is
really advantageous for the company.
Debt that sharecropping was all about.
Exactly. Smoke says we want US dollars because we can spend them anywhere, and Stack's like, look, these people have been working. This is not about you fighting the plantation. This is about you providing a release and a refuge for these workers. He sees intercommunal possibilities for peace and fellowship rooted in culture, art, and hedonism. He's the brother that has the wider vision.
He has the wider vision, but he's very aware of certain realities and of certain limits, the most obvious of which is the impossibility, I should say, in 1932 in Clarksdale of an interracial relationship with Mary, who's his great love. Stack is not an ethereal, kind of naive character. He has his own understanding of the sort of hard realities of life.
Right, yes.
But you're right that is much more of a free spirit, far more gregarious and outgoing than Smoke, seems to be much less quick to violence than Smoke does. It's also notable that it's Smoke who has committed the act of patricide in order to protect Stack, right? So Smoke's trauma, it seems to me, is much more on his sleeve than Stack's.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. So that's the brothers.
Mm-hmm.
There are other family relationships that are going on. When I was trying to make the case that the sort of modern or organized, whatever the right word would be, religion was a kind of false siren song of utopia. I'm not saying that, as a statement. I'm saying that's how I read the movie's kind of ideological framework. And you kind of pushed back on that. The thought I had was, well, then explain to me the difference between Sammy's role in the story, which is an exponent of aesthetics, art, music, dancing as fellowship and the real path to utopia. The difference between him and his father, who seems to me to be just standing in his way and actually saying a set of things that are just wrong. Right. About the sinfulness of pleasure and ethereal experience.
I agree. It's a different vision of community that he's offering, right? Compare, for example, what's happening in the juke joint to what's happening during service in the church. It's the same kind of communal, joyful release that is being promised in the juke joint. So I think, that character is ambivalent. And I think we should also say that the movie is at pains to not simply portray Sammy's father as a tyrant. Smoke and Stack ask him, is he violent with you?
Yeah.
And Sammy says, no. If anything, it's our mom who, does the kind of corporal punishment. The movie explicitly contrasts Sammy's father with Sammy's father's brother. So Smokestack's father, who's, massively abusive, right? So how much is his father really standing in his way? I mean, he doesn't stop him from leaving. He doesn't take the guitar. He brings the guitar, remember, brings Sammy's guitar inside the house of worship to keep it safe, right? So I think he's a little more ambivalent, right? In a certain way. I don't think he's necessarily villainous. I think he's portrayed as the kind of maybe the overbearing parent who has a stubborn vision of the good life and of what it would mean to live, as we've been talking about, a life of love and fellowship. But I don't read him as a tyrant. And I don't think the movie wants us to see him as a villain in any obvious way.
Okay. Yeah. What other family ties would you like to?
Well, I mean, the other ones that are really interesting are the relationship between Smoke and Stack and Mary and Mary's mother.
Okay.
Right. So what we learn is that Smoke and Stack's mother dies in childbirth. Mm-hmm. And that it's Mary's mother, who I presume is like a midwife. Is the sense that we're getting. She is the one who saves the babies' lives. She nourishes them. They clearly spend significant time with Mary's mother. And remember, Mary has returned to Clarksdale because the previous day her mother has died, or I should say the previous day has been her mother's funeral. And so they've all grown up together, right? And there are these kind of complicated family dynamics as well. And Mary is herself mixed race. Her mother was mixed race, but Mary is passing as white, right? Which is kind of that's the root of the major obstacle for why Stack and Mary have this kind of unfulfilled romance or love in the real world. There are all these kinds of dynamics, right? About parents and sons, about mothers and children. And they all, of course, exist within this larger sort of universe of the God and devil as themselves parental figures, right? God, after all, is our Father, right? And it's an especially freighted kind of presence that God has in a place like Clarksdale, Mississippi, and the iconic sort of Highway 61 that runs through it. And Highway 61 is the highway that linked up in the 1930s and 1940s. It linked the Mississippi Delta to Chicago. And so it is this mythically freighted kind of place in American music, in American blues music, but in American rock and roll as well. And there's that great Bob Dylan song that I put in the show notes, in which he sort of brings together Highway 61 Revisited. He brings together all of these dynamics of light and dark, of God and the devil, of the sacred and the profane. In his retelling of...
Just give us a few bars.
Yeah, well, I'll give you the lyrics. I won't give you the bars. In his retelling of the Abrahamic story of God and Abraham. So God said to Abraham, kill me a son. Abe says, man, you must be putting me on. God says, no. Abe says, what? God says, you can do what you want, Abe, but the next time you see me coming, you better run, right? Invoking the sort of the wrathful God of the Old Testament. Well, Abe says, where do you want this killing done? God says, out on Highway 61. So it's a reference. So Highway 61 becomes this kind of consecrated place. It's this condensation symbol of all of these points of apparently unlike things coming together. And Highway 61, of course, also in American musical mythology, is the space at which the crossroads exists, where blues musicians, most infamously Robert Johnson, is alleged to have made a deal with the devil in order to become the greatest guitar player who ever lived, sold his soul there. So it is this, all of these sort of mythical elements that revolve around visions of community, revolve around visions of family, revolve around, again, apparently unlike things coming together into this sort of hybrid space. They all are located by the movie in Clarksdale, Mississippi, all at Highway 61, all at those crossroads. And it's a truly super rich and skillfully done form of storytelling, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I get the sense we're kind of coming to the end here.
Yeah.
And I think we should just spend a couple of minutes, I think, on aesthetic appreciation of the movie. There's a real look about it, a real almost feel about it, right? It's a very sexy movie. It looks beautiful. Of course, it sounds amazing. There's a grittiness about it, and all the things kind of come together to have a real immersive effect on you. And although it is, I think, fundamentally a movie of ideas and some quite profound ideas, you're not there thinking I'm watching a movie about ideas, right? You're sort of experiencing it on a visceral level, and then it's staying with you where there are these waypoints where people are making allusions to things like utopianism or racial politics or other grand ideas, and those are staying with you kind of after the aesthetic experience and are sort of enhanced by it.
And again, in a callback that you just made to Andor, which we've been doing, and again, we don't want to make this about Andor, but there is the creation of a lived world in which the audience is kind of transported to, and it's through living the lives of these characters here in Sinners It's For a Day. It's in living their lives and seeing their world through their eyes that we get exposed to all of these much broader and much deeper set of themes and messages about the meaning of life and about the meaning of how to create, if it's possible, how to create truly emancipatory and progressive communities. It's the same thing that happens in Andor.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Tremendous movie. Very, very, very rich. 100% recommend.
Yes.
And I think
thumbs up.
Yeah. So we should really copyright that as a way to describe and talk about movies.
No one's ever heard that.
No one's ever heard of that before. And on that bombshell,